She stood at the edge of the king-sized bed, her bridal dress still on, soaked slightly from the unexpected rain that hit just as the limousine pulled up to the mansion gates. The diamond on her ring finger sparkled like a lie in the golden chandelier light above her, mocking her with its flawless shine. She had married him only hours ago, the billionaire every magazine worshipped, the man women envied her for. And yet, as the night stretched into silence, something felt wrong. He hadn't touched her, not even a kiss. He simply said, "Get some rest," and disappeared into the other wing of the mansion. No wedding night warmth, no celebration, just cold, rehearsed words. She told herself he was tired, that billionaires had their moods. But then the thunderstorm began, and in the crackling shadows outside the window, she saw him, not where he said he'd be. He stood in the garden, in the rain, barefoot, staring into the woods like he was waiting for something, or someone. She watched paralyzed. He wasn't alone. A second figure emerged from the trees, cloaked and carrying something. A box. She ducked instinctively, heart racing. The man she had just married was taking the box, opening it, then dropping to his knees in front of it. That's when she saw it, a glint of something silver and red. Her stomach turned. She wanted to believe it was a dream. But when she blinked again, both men were gone and the box had vanished. Her new husband walked back in 10 minutes later, dry, composed, and empty-handed. He finally emerged from the bathroom, wearing nothing but a black silk robe, his face clean. "And did you sleep well?" he asked, like he hadn't been out in a storm burying secrets. That was the night she realized she had no idea who she'd married. And whatever he was hiding, it wasn't just about money. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay frozen under silk sheets that smelled like lavender and secrets, her eyes glued to the faint shadow moving behind the frosted glass of the bathroom door. He was humming not a tune she recognized, but something oddly haunting, like an old lullaby twisted in tone. She didn't know whether to be afraid or just confused. This wasn't the man she had fallen for. The man she met 3 months ago at that charity gala had been charming, articulate, and mysteriously reserved, the kind of man who commanded rooms without even trying. She remembered how her heels had clicked nervously on the marble floors when he approached her, how his deep voice cut through the noise, and how he never once looked at her like she was just another pretty face. That night, he said one thing she couldn't forget. "I don't trust people easily, but I think I might trust you." Back then, those words felt like an honor. Now, they felt like a warning. Their courtship had been fast, almost cinematic. Roses sent every morning, private jets for weekend getaways, and quiet dinners where he asked her more questions than he answered. It wasn't until he proposed in Paris, with a ring so heavy it felt unnatural on her hand, that she started to notice the silence between his sentences, the things he didn't say, the things she was too love-struck to question. Now, lying beside his untouched side of the bed, she began to wonder if she had ever known him at all. Who stands in the rain at midnight talking to a man with a box? Who returns as if nothing happened and asks, "Did you sleep well?" As if her eyes weren't wide open the whole time. When emotionless, he simply looked at her and said, "We'll have breakfast at 9. Don't be late." Then he turned off the light and got into bed facing away from her, like she was just an employee hired for a role she hadn't been given a script for. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the dark ceiling, stomach turning, and asked herself a question she never imagined asking just hours after marrying the man of her dreams. What have I done? The morning light spilled into the room like nothing had happened, casting soft golden hues over the polished marble floors and high ceiling. She sat upright in bed, still in her white satin slip, the bridal gown crumpled on the floor like a relic of a decision she wasn't sure she made consciously. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., there was a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find a maid no older than herself, with pale skin, anxious eyes, and a forced smile. "Mr. Cade is waiting in the dining hall," she said politely, then added, almost in a whisper, "Try not to be late again. He doesn't like delays." The way she said it sent a cold shiver down her spine. Her? Late? Again? It was their first morning as a married couple. She hadn't even been given a schedule. Yet someone already expected her to behave like an obedient trophy. She quickly got dressed, a simple black dress from her suitcase, because she still didn't know what kind of wife she was supposed to be here, and followed the echo of her own footsteps down the hallway. The mansion was vast and eerily silent. Art pieces lined the walls, all dark oil paintings of men and women with no names, their eyes painted just wide enough to look disturbed. The dining hall was grand and excessive. The table could seat 30, yet only 2 plates were set. He was already there, reading a newspaper, wearing a charcoal suit with a silver tie, looking like a man with no flaws. "Good morning," she said quietly. He looked up, eyes unreadable. "You're late." She checked the watch on her wrist. 9:02. "It won't happen again," she replied, because that's what her instincts told her to say. He nodded once, then folded his paper. "We'll be flying to New York this afternoon. There's a gala tomorrow night. You'll need to look presentable." She blinked. "What gala?" "Does it matter?" he replied, sipping his coffee. "You're my wife now. Appearances matter more than your questions." Her chest tightened. There it was again, that cold dismissal, like she was part of his portfolio rather than his life. She pushed her breakfast around the plate, barely eating. "And the man from last night?" she finally asked, her voice low but firm. He looked up slowly, his face calm, his eyes ice. "What man?" "The one in the garden." You must have been dreaming," he cut in, setting his cup down. "There was no one, and I wasn't in the garden. I had work in the study." She stared at him, trying to read his tone, but it was like staring at a statue, carved from charm and ice. "You're tired." "Jet lag," he added. "You'll get used to this life." Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked past her without another glance. She sat there, stunned. Was she losing her mind? Or was he trying to make her doubt it? By noon, she was packed and seated in the back of his private jet, the kind of luxury aircraft most people only saw in movies. Leather seats, crystal glasses, velvet drapes, everything smelled like new money and old secrets. He didn't speak to her once during the flight. Instead, he typed furiously on his laptop while she stared out the window, pretending not to feel his presence like a weight beside her. Well-programmed mask. Hours later, she stood beside him at the gala, smiling at strangers, nodding at names she didn't know, pretending not to notice how every woman looked at her with the same question in their eyes. The silence between them was thick, uncomfortable, and calculated. Every time she glanced at him, he looked completely immersed in something else, yet never once offered to explain what that something was. And then there was the flight attendant, too quiet, too trained. She noticed how the woman never met her eyes but always looked to him for approval before offering anything, as if she wasn't a guest but a package. They landed in Manhattan and were whisked away in a black Bentley to a hotel that didn't even have a name on its entrance, just a sleek black door guarded by men in suits and wired earpieces. Inside, the suite was massive and soulless. She barely had time to admire the view before he handed her a box. "Wear this tonight," he said. Inside was a designer gown, elegant, expensive, and stiff, and a diamond choker so thick it looked more like a leash than jewelry. "Is this a party or a showcase?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Both," he replied. "You're on display now. Smile when you have to, speak only when needed. I'll handle the rest." She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was terrifying. The man she had married was starting to feel less like a human being and more like a why-her. The man shook his hand. The women sized her up. A few called her lucky. One whispered too close to her ear, "He never brings them twice." That one made her skin crawl. But she kept smiling, just like he told her to. Later that evening, as they walked back to the car, she gathered the courage to speak. "Why did you marry me?" she asked softly. He paused for a beat, looked at her, then gave her the same cold, charming smile he had worn the day they met. "Because you were the easiest one to believe the lie." Her legs felt weak as they walked through the lobby of the hotel, the meaning of his words settling like dust in her chest, quiet but suffocating. The easiest one to believe the lie. What lie? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was follow him in stunned silence. Back in the suite, he disappeared into the bathroom without another word. She stood there in the center of the room, still in the suffocating gown, feeling like a mannequin that had been returned to storage. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached behind her neck to unclasp the diamond choker. It felt like shedding a collar, not removing jewelry. She kicked off her heels, walked barefoot to the mirror, and stared at the woman reflected back at her. Her makeup was flawless, her hair elegant, her posture trained, but her eyes betrayed her. There was confusion, there was fear, and there was something growing behind both rage. She needed to know what was really going on. She waited until the bathroom door shut and the sound of water running masked her footsteps. Moving quickly, she tiptoed to his side of the room, to the desk where he had carelessly dropped his phone and keycard. She took the keycard and exited the suite, her heart pounding so loud she thought it might echo off the walls. The hallway was quiet, but there were cameras she knew that, so she walked calmly, trying to seem like a guest going for a stroll, until she found the other room he had swiped open earlier. Room 1704. She hesitated only a second before sliding the keycard in. The door clicked open. Inside was a second suite, but this one looked nothing like the other. No luxury, no windows. The walls were black, the lights were dim, and there were papers everywhere. Files, photos, names she didn't recognize but instinctively knew were important. And then she saw a small metal box on the table, the same size and shape as the one she had seen that night in the garden. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a set of photographs, one of a woman, young, bruised. Her heart stopped. The next photo was worse. The same woman, lifeless, laid out on what looked like a cold metal table. The third photo was of her husband standing in the shadows with blood on his sleeves. Her scream caught in her throat. She slammed the box shut and backed away, nearly knocking over a chair. But before she could turn, she heard the door clicking shut behind her. Slowly, she turned around, and there he was, standing in the doorway, soaking wet, smiling like death in a tailored suit. For a moment, time froze. She stood still, breath caught, as he stepped further into the dim-lit room, closing the distance with the same cold elegance he wore like a second skin. Her eyes darted toward the exit, but he moved faster than her thoughts. "Looking for something?" he asked calmly, as if they were having a casual conversation. She shook her head, backing up slowly, her legs brushing against the metal table. "Who is she?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the box, lifted the lid, and stared at the photo on top like it was a piece of art he admired. "Someone who asked too many questions," he finally said, lifting his eyes to hers. "Like you just did." Her stomach twisted. She couldn't believe she was standing across from a man she had married, a man she had once thought could be her future, and now he looked like a nightmare in designer clothes. "Why?" she managed to say. "Why marry me? Why show me this?" "Because it doesn't matter now," he said with a slight shrug. "You've already crossed the line. The wedding was to protect me, not to love you. You were convenient." Her heart cracked at the word convenient, as if she was a tool, a pawn, a disposable mask for him to hide behind. "You need to forget what you saw," he added, stepping closer. "Forget the pictures, forget the room, forget the woman." She turned her head away. "I won't." "Then you're going to have a very difficult marriage," he said, and for the first time, something dark flashed behind his eyes, not anger, but warning. She didn't reply. She didn't have words left. He took a deep breath, then walked past her, opened the door, and held it open like he was escorting her out of a museum instead of a murder scene. "Come on, we have an image to maintain." She walked out in silence, her steps numb, her mind racing. This wasn't just a bad marriage. This was a prison wrapped in diamonds. And now she knew there was no running. Not until she figured out exactly what secret she had just stepped into. Not until she knew how to survive it. Back in the suite, she sat on the edge of the bed, still in her gala dress, the weight of everything she had just seen pressing down on her like an invisible cage. He disappeared into another room, leaving her alone in the silence that now screamed louder than any threat. Her hands trembled as she stared at the carpet, trying to process the photos, the woman, the blood. Her brain kept repeating his words. She asked too many questions. Over and over, they spun in her head like a curse. That woman could have been her. Still might be. She knew now this man wasn't just hiding secrets. He was capable of burying them permanently. Her only hope now was time and silence. If she was going to survive this, she had to pretend. Pretend to forget. Pretend to be loyal. Pretend to be in love with the man who might very well be a murderer. She couldn't afford mistakes. Not now. Not with eyes possibly watching her every move. So she waited until dawn, then carefully moved to the bathroom, shut the door, and locked it. There, she peeled off the gown with trembling fingers and stood in front of the mirror. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow, but there was still fire in her chest, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Rage. She opened the medicine cabinet, pretending to look for cotton balls, and saw a small, unused pregnancy test tucked in the back. Her fingers hovered over it, then slowly pulled it out. A month ago, she would have ignored it. A month ago, she was free, but something inside her whispered check. Minutes later, she sat on the tiled floor, staring at two red lines. Her hands dropped to her stomach, her breath caught in her throat. Pregnant. She was pregnant. She felt her entire world tilt. A new life inside her, tied to his blood, tied to his legacy. And now, she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for something innocent, something he didn't know existed yet. And she'd be damned if he ever found out. She flushed the test and buried it deep within the bathroom trash, covering it with tissue and wrappers like it was a weapon, because in this house, in this life, it was. That single stick could cost her everything if it ended up in the wrong hands. She exited the bathroom quietly, wiping her face dry, and found the sweet dark. He was already asleep, or pretending to be. His side of the bed was untouched again, just like the night before. She didn't crawl in. Instead, she sat on the chaise lounge in the corner, curled up under a blanket, pretending to be just another piece of furniture in the room. When morning came, she wore the most neutral expression she could manage, dressed in whatever plain outfit she had left, and greeted him at the table like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't seen a dead woman's face. Like she wasn't carrying his child. "You look tired," he said without looking up from his tablet. "Didn't sleep well?" "Just nerves," she replied softly, keeping her voice flat. "Everything's still new." He nodded, sipped his coffee, and handed her an envelope. "You'll be seeing my assistant today. She'll get you set up with a new wardrobe, PR training, and media coaching. We're going to be in the spotlight a lot more now, and I expect you to keep up." She took the envelope with both hands, her grip steady despite the blood rushing in her ears. Of course. As she stepped outside to the waiting car, she glanced up toward the hotel's top floor. There on the corner balcony stood a man in black, watching. He didn't move, didn't flinch. She looked away quickly and stepped into the car. Inside, his assistant was waiting, a woman named Marla, older, sharp-eyed, with a smile so polished it could cut glass. "Welcome to the public life," Marla said, passing her a tablet. "You'll need to learn your new image. There's a story we've crafted about your past, your education, your so-called charity work, your courtship, everything. And you'll memorize it, word for word." Rosaline swallowed hard. "I already have a past." "Not anymore," Marla replied. "You have his past now, and his image. You don't own yourself anymore, sweetheart, he does." Those words sunk into her like poison, but she nodded, lips tight, heart raging. She had to play along for now, because while they were busy scripting her future, she was secretly planning her escape. The ride back to the mansion was quiet to quiet. Marla had dropped her off at the estate gates, and the driver said nothing as he opened the door and gestured for her to go inside. The grand hallway greeted her with its usual coldness, floors so shiny she could see her reflection, and chandeliers that sparkled like judgmental eyes. She walked slowly, carefully, until she reached her room, or what used to be hers. Now, it felt like a borrowed cage with silk sheets. As she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, letting herself breathe for the first time that day. She took off the heels, peeled away the jewelry, and walked barefoot to the desk where the envelope from that morning still sat. She opened it again, rereading the schedule. Media coaching, smile training, body language control. They didn't want a wife, they wanted a puppet. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Static. Then a voice, a whisper, "You don't know me, but I know what he's done. And you're not the first." Her heart dropped. "Who are you?" she asked, whispering back, but the line went dead. She called back, no ring, no tone, nothing. She stared at the screen, fingers shaking. She wasn't the first. She wasn't the only. Somewhere out there, someone else knew. Maybe someone who survived. Maybe someone who didn't. She didn't sleep that night either. She stayed up, pacing, listening to the creaks of the old house, jumping at every small sound. And then around midnight, she heard something soft, footsteps. Not near her door, but in the hallway. She crept to the door and looked through the peephole. A maid, the same young girl who had warned her that first morning, was walking down the hallway, holding a tray and glancing around nervously. Without thinking, Rosaline slipped out and followed. Down the hall, around the corner, into the east wing she had never entered. The maid paused at a large wooden door, looked around again, then knocked 3 times. The door opened just a sliver. She passed the tray inside, whispered something, and turned. She gasped when she saw Rosaline behind her. "Please," she whispered, eyes wide. "You shouldn't be here." "Who's in that room?" Rosaline asked. "Who are you feeding?" "Don't ask," the maid said, voice trembling. "He'll know." "He?" Rosaline whispered. "You mean my husband?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, backing away. "Please go, for your baby's sake." Rosaline froze. "How do you know?" "We all know," the maid said, and then she turned and ran down the hallway, disappearing into the shadows. Rosaline stared at the door. Something or someone was behind it, alive and hidden. She reached for the handle, but it was locked. She stood there, hand hovering over the locked doorknob, pulse pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind that door was something he didn't want her to see, someone, maybe, who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The mansion suddenly felt colder, the silence thicker, like the walls themselves were watching her. She took a step back, then another, until she was far enough down the hallway to disappear into the shadows if someone came. She didn't return to her room. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in the dimly lit reading room near the stairs, clutching her phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for that voice to return. It didn't, but someone else did. At sunrise, she heard the sound of the front door opening, which was odd. No one left or arrived without guards at that hour. She peered through the curtains and saw her husband walking in, wearing the same suit from yesterday. No tie, no expression, but something about him looked off, like a man who had buried something and not washed his hands yet. She quickly retreated before he saw her and hurried back upstairs. Inside her room, she grabbed a notebook and began writing everything she'd seen, every strange behavior, every coded glance, every locked room and whispered warning. If she was going to survive, she needed evidence, proof, a map of this madness. She even drew a layout of the mansion from memory, circling the east wing and marking the secret room behind the locked door. She was halfway through scribbling when the door opened without a knock. He walked in, cool as ever, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she lied. "Good." He handed her one of the cups. She took it but didn't drink. "We'll be hosting a dinner tonight. Some business partners." Smile. "Wear something red. It suits you." She nodded slowly. "And the locked wing?" she asked, testing him. "Should I avoid it?" His eyes paused on her for a second too long, the smile on his lips not reaching his eyes. "It's off limits," he said softly, "just like the past." Then he left. Her hands shook. He knew she knew, but he wasn't angry. He was calm. Too calm. And that terrified her even more. She set the coffee down untouched and walked to the mirror. She looked at her reflection and whispered, "I need to get out, but I need to know everything before I do. Because whatever was behind that door wasn't just a secret. It was a key. Maybe to her freedom, maybe to his destruction." That entire day, she moved through the mansion like a shadow, acting exactly how he wanted, smiling at the staff, nodding politely when Marla called to review her public schedule, pretending to be the perfect obedient wife. But behind her calm eyes, every breath she took was laced with calculation. She needed to get inside that room. She needed to know what was worth hiding behind a locked door in a billionaire's private estate. As the sun set, The staff began preparing for the dinner party he'd mentioned. Chefs moved like machines in the kitchen, waiters rehearsed formal greetings, and the wine cellar was raided for the rarest bottles. She was handed a crimson dress, one that clung to her like a warning, and ordered to be ready by 8. She dressed silently, her mind racing with plans. By the time she descended the staircase, she wore the same mask he wore daily: blank, controlled, elegant. The guests arrived in sleek cars, the kind of people whose names were in headlines and whose secrets stayed buried under millions. She played her part well, the charming hostess, the perfect companion. She laughed when required, smiled when expected. But all the while, her eyes stayed locked on one thing: the master keycard clipped to the head butler's belt. She waited until dessert was served and the music grew louder, then slipped away from the dining hall. Her heels tapped softly against the marble floor as she made her way to the east wing, rehearsing her lie in case someone caught her. But no one did. She reached the butler's room, found the spare coat he'd left unattended, and pulled the card from the clip. Her fingers were trembling again, heart pounding. She walked briskly to the locked door. One swipe, a soft beep. The lock clicked. She pushed the door open. What she saw inside didn't make sense. Not at first. It was a nursery. Crib, toys, a rocking chair. The walls were painted in soft pastels, decorated with stenciled stars. But the room was cold, dusty, abandoned. Then she saw the old photo framed on the shelf. Her husband, younger, smiling. Next to him, a woman she didn't recognize, and a baby in her arms. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. On the back, scribbled in a soft, shaky handwriting, "To James, for our little angel." Her head spun. James? Not his name. Not the name on his ID. And the woman? Who was she? The baby? Behind her, the door creaked. She turned around, the frame still in her hands. And there he stood, her husband. No smile, no warning, just a look in his eyes that sent terror down her spine. "I told you not to open doors you can't close," he said. And this time, he locked it from the inside. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The photo frame in her hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds, yet she didn't dare put it down. His steps were slow, deliberate, echoing off the nursery walls like a metronome of dread. "Where did you get the key?" he asked, voice low but steady. She said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward the door behind him, still shut tight. He noticed. "Don't think about leaving," he added. "Not yet. You've come this far. Might as well know the rest." He reached past her and picked up the rocking chair with one hand, setting it upright with a hollow thud. Then he sat. Right there, in the middle of a room that once held a child, he sat like a man preparing for confession. "Her name was Layla," he said. "My first wife. We were married 3 years before you ever existed in my world." Rosaline didn't move, didn't breathe. She listened. She was beautiful, clever, quiet like you. Never argued, never asked much. Except, she couldn't give me what I wanted most. His eyes shifted toward the crib. "We lost a baby," he said flatly. "She couldn't recover. Neither could I." Silence hung like a blade between them. "So you locked this room and buried the truth?" Rosaline finally whispered. "You changed your name. You started over like they never existed." He looked at her now, his eyes unreadable. "I did what I had to. Some ghosts don't stay in the grave unless you bury them twice." She didn't know what disturbed her more, the tragedy or how casually he spoke of it. "But that doesn't explain the photos," she added, her voice cracking. "That woman, the bruises, the blood." His jaw clenched. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, she wasn't Layla. She was someone else who got too close, dug into things that weren't her business. Rosaline's stomach turned. "And you silenced her?" "I warned her," he replied, eyes narrowing. "Just like I warned you." Her heart was racing now. "Why are you telling me all this?" He stood suddenly. "Because you're carrying my child," he said. "And I won't lose another family. Not this time. You may think you're trapped, Rosaline, but I'm just trying to protect what's mine." He walked to the door, unlocked it, and opened it slowly. "You can leave this room," he said without looking back. "But if you ever betray me, there will be no third warning." And with that, he stepped out and disappeared into the hallway. She was alone, in a nursery of ghosts, holding a frame of forgotten love and lost lives. And now she knew she wasn't just his wife. She was part of a cycle, and she had to break it before history repeated itself again. She stayed in the nursery long after he left, frozen among the dust and the ghosts. The air smelled of dried memories, stale perfume, old wood, faded sorrow. Every inch of that room was a lie, a mask over a wound that had never healed. Or worse, had festered into something monstrous. She stared at the crib, the toys, the tiny shoes lined up perfectly on the shelf, and her hand instinctively went to her own stomach. Her baby was real, alive, innocent, and at risk. She couldn't afford to feel pity for the men who might one day become the reason her child never felt safe. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about protection. Hers and the babies. And she knew now that the only way to protect either was to stop pretending and start planning. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She studied. She took mental notes of the East Wing layout, of the number of cameras she'd seen, of the security patterns. She started paying attention to the staff who flinched when he entered a room, who looked like they had something to say but wouldn't dare. One of them had slipped a pregnancy test into her bathroom. Someone was watching. Someone was trying to help. She had to find them. But until then, she had to play the role of the perfect wife. At breakfast, she greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, even though her skin crawled at the touch. At the foundation luncheon later that day, she laughed at his dry jokes and rested her hand on his shoulder like she was madly in love. And every time the cameras flashed, she turned her face slightly so no one could see the tension behind her smile. But it was all part of the plan. That evening, when she was alone again, she opened a blank journal she found in the study and began writing everything down, every timeline, every lie, every phrase he'd used that made her flinch. She drew a floor plan of the mansion from memory and marked every locked door. She even listed staff members by face and name. And then she made a new list. One titled, "All the Ways I Might Disappear." She wouldn't let that happen. She would not vanish like the woman in the photo. She would not end up as another secret buried in a nursery. She would survive. And one day soon, he'd regret ever thinking she was the easiest one to believe the lie. 2 days passed, and the mansion had settled into a deceptive rhythm: parties, press, polite dinners with masked smiles. But behind that illusion, Rosaline was building something far more dangerous: her escape plan. Every morning she woke up beside him. Every kiss she faked, every lie she mirrored, it wasn't weakness anymore. It was war and silence. She'd identified 3 staff members who seemed different. The maid with trembling hands who had warned her, the older gardener who always looked away when she passed, and the driver who had once slipped her an extra phone charger quietly, without a word. She didn't know their full stories yet, but her instinct screamed that one of them knew more than they let on. On the 4th day, opportunity knocked, quite literally. A light knock on her door came at dusk. She opened it cautiously to find the gardener standing there, holding a potted plant. "Mr. Cade said to place this in your study," he said quietly. His eyes flicked to the hallway. "May I?" She nodded, stepping aside. As he entered, he lowered the pot onto the table, then whispered so low she barely heard, "Check the soil tonight. No one else can know." And then he was gone. The second the hallway was clear, she locked the door, pulled on gloves, and began digging through the soil. Her fingers hit something hard. A flash drive. Small, black, untitled. She tucked it into her robe and pushed the dirt back in place. That night, when her husband claimed he had business in the city and left with 2 guards, she waited exactly 10 minutes before plugging the drive into the laptop she kept hidden beneath the bed. What she saw changed everything. Video files, audio recordings, one after another of him. Secret meetings, encrypted names, women's faces blurred, but screams audible. Documents money laundered through fake charities, property bought under aliases, and a file named Backup Threat. That froze her blood. She opened it. Photos of herself, her parents' house, her school records, a surveillance shot from her old apartment she'd never seen before. He'd known her long before they'd met at the gala. He'd planned it, all of it. Their meeting, their marriage. Her stomach lurched. She wanted to throw up, scream, claw at the walls, but she didn't. Instead, she copied every file onto a fresh USB, locked it in a hollowed-out book, and returned the original to the pot. Then she stood in the dark, trembling, her hand over her belly. She had just confirmed her worst fears. She hadn't fallen into this nightmare by accident. She had been chosen, hunted, and now it was her turn to hunt back. The next morning, Rosaline's face was a masterpiece of poise. Not a flicker of emotion betrayed the storm rising inside her. She joined him for breakfast in the sunroom, where the light was too bright and the truth too dark. He looked at her with his usual smug confidence, sipping orange juice like he hadn't orchestrated her entire life. "You look well rested," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "You must be getting comfortable here." She smiled back barely. "I'm learning to adjust." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, his touch cold. "Good. That's what I like about you. You adapt." Her skin crawled. "No," she thought. "I survive." When he left for a board meeting, she moved quickly, USB drive still hidden. She made her way to the east wing again, not to the nursery, but to the study he rarely used. She now knew from the documents on the drive that he kept a second safe there. It wasn't where the staff would look if things ever went wrong, it was his insurance plan. She found the painting of a lion above the fireplace, just as described, and behind it, a safe embedded into the wall. She pulled the USB from the book, inserted it into the laptop she'd brought with her, and turned on a voice recorder. "My name is Rosaline Mace," she whispered. "If you are hearing this, then something has happened to me." She laid it all out, how they met, what she found, what he was hiding. Names, dates, faces. He planned everything. "And I'm pregnant with his child. I'm not safe anymore." She saved the audio file, encrypted it, and copied it to the USB along with the others. Then she slipped the drive into a false bottom of a vase in the corner of the study, one she knew no one ever cleaned. But that wasn't enough. She needed leverage, a confrontation, something on record. So when he returned later that night and poured himself a drink, she stood in the doorway, arms folded, voice calm. "We need to talk." He didn't flinch. "Now?" "Yes," she said, stepping into the room. "About how you knew me before we ever met. About the surveillance. About the file titled Backup Threat." The glass stopped midair. Slowly, he set it down. "So you found it?" "I did." Her heart pounded. "But she didn't show it." "I want answers." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Of course you do. You always were the curious type." He poured another drink, this time for her. "You're playing a dangerous game, Rosaline." "I'm not playing," she replied. "I'm choosing sides. And you're on the wrong one." For the first time, his expression cracked. "Just a little, but enough." "You're mine," he said lowly. "You and that child. Don't forget it." She took the glass from his hand, but instead of drinking it, she poured it slowly into the plant beside them, never breaking eye contact. "You don't own me," she whispered. "Not anymore." And she walked out, her silence louder than any scream. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window of her room, watching the moonlight cast silver shadows across the garden below. Somewhere in that darkness, her life was waiting to be taken back. The confrontation had rattled him, she could feel it. His pride didn't handle defiance well, especially from the woman he thought he'd crafted into a perfect puppet. But now he knew she wasn't under his control anymore. That meant things would escalate. And soon. She needed help. Real help. Not whispers in hallways or USB drives in potted plants. She picked up the second phone, the burner the driver had slipped into her gym bag 2 days ago, and dialed the only number saved in it. It rang once, then again. Finally, a voice. "You're ready?" the person asked. Rosaline didn't ask who it was. She just answered, "Yes." "Then you need to get out. Tonight. He's planning to relocate you." Her blood froze. "What?" "He found your notebook," the voice said. "Your floor plan. The lists. He knows you've been documenting everything." Her mind spun. The study. She must have left something open. "How much time do I have?" she whispered. "Maybe hours." "And where do I go?" "Back entrance. Behind the greenhouses. Midnight. A car will be waiting." "What about the files?" "We'll get them later. Just bring yourself. And your child." She looked down at her belly and closed her eyes. "Okay, I'm coming." She packed silently. Not much, just enough to blend in, to not look suspicious. Loose clothes, sneakers, no jewelry. The only thing she couldn't leave behind was the hollowed-out book with the second copy of the USB drive. She slipped it into her tote and exhaled. She'd done all she could. Her story was recorded. Her evidence was hidden. All that remained now was survival. At 11:50 p.m., she crept through the mansion like a ghost, every creak of the floorboard a threat. She avoided the cameras, avoided the guards. Every step brought her closer to the greenhouse, closer to freedom. Then she saw its headlights through the hedges. The car. Her heart raced. She ran the last few steps, reached for the handle and stopped. A voice behind her. Calm, cold, final. Going somewhere, darling? She turned slowly, dread filling her throat like smoke. There he stood, her husband. No guards, no guns, just him. And in his hand, her burner phone. I gave you everything, he said. And you repay me with this? You never gave me anything but a cage, she replied, standing her ground. You stalked me, used me, and now you think you can control me forever. He stepped closer. You're pregnant with my child. You think I'll just let you go? It's not your child anymore, she said softly. It's mine, and we're leaving. For a moment, silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Then a click, a soft one, the sound of a door unlocking not from behind him, but behind her. The car. It was still waiting, still watching. Then a second voice. Step away from her, Mr. Cade. Men emerged from the shadows, federal jackets, drawn weapons. His eyes widened. I told you, Rosaline, whispered. You never controlled me. You just underestimated me. He lunged, but it was too late. They tackled him to the ground as she stepped back, holding her stomach protectively. As the cuffs clicked shut, he looked up at her with pure hatred. This isn't over, he spat. It is for you, she said. And then she turned and walked toward the car. The car door closed behind her with a soft thud that felt like the final word to a cruel chapter. As the vehicle sped away from the mansion, Rosaline didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just watched the world blur past the windows, her hand resting over her stomach like a vow. The man beside her, dressed in a black jacket with no badge but eyes that had seen too much, finally spoke. We've been trying to bring him down for 2 years. You're the first to get close enough. She didn't answer. You did good, he added quietly. Still, she stayed silent, because the truth was, it wasn't over. Not yet. One man in cuffs didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't free the others who had suffered in silence. And it didn't guarantee her child's safety. She wasn't just a witness. She was evidence. And now, she was a target. At the safe house, a nondescript cabin buried in the woods, she was given a burner phone, a change of clothes, and a warning. He has people. If he's not out on bail by sunrise, he'll make calls. You need to lay low. She nodded, taking it all in without flinching. They gave her a room upstairs, plain, safe, quiet. But she didn't sleep. She sat at the window again, staring out into the trees, waiting for headlights that never came. By morning, the news broke. Billionaire James Cade arrested on multiple charges including fraud, obstruction of justice, and suspicion of homicide. His mugshot was everywhere, but so was hers, the wedding photos, the red carpet smiles. The media wanted her story, and they weren't going to stop digging. She couldn't risk going public yet. Not until the trial. Not until the files she'd hidden were safely in the right hands. So she called the gardener, the only number saved in her burner phone. It's time, she said. He didn't ask what she meant. I'll bring the files to the press myself. But before she could hang up, she heard it. Static. Then a third voice. A soft breath. A whisper. You thought this was over? Her heart dropped. She pulled the phone from her ear and stared at it. The call had been intercepted. Somehow, somewhere, he'd reached her. From a holding cell. Or through someone loyal. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that he wasn't finished. Not yet. That night, the safe house burned. She woke to smoke, flames curling under her door, alarm screaming into the darkness. She ran through the hallway, down the stairs, barefoot on burning wood. The air was thick. She couldn't breathe. A figure reached for her through the smoke, not a rescuer, not an agent, someone else, someone who wasn't supposed to know she was here. She turned, sprinted through the kitchen, crashed through the back door, and into the cold night air. The trees swallowed her. Her lungs burned. But she kept running. Barefoot, pregnant, hunted. And somewhere behind her, Through the roar of fire, she heard the same voice again laughing. "Run, little wife, run." She ran until her legs gave out beneath her, collapsing in a clearing where moonlight spilled over her like a fragile spotlight. Her breath came in broken gasps, her throat dry, her feet cut and blistered from the escape. She leaned against a tree, heart pounding like a war drum, one hand cradling her stomach while the other clutched a burner phone like it could still save her. "He found me. Even behind bars, even with cuffs on his wrists, he still had reach, influence, power. He'd built an empire on manipulation and fear, and clearly, it hadn't crumbled yet." She pressed the phone's only emergency contact, the agent who had helped her escape. But there was no answer, just static, then silence. The line was dead. She was alone. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the soft rustle of leaves. Then, a branch cracked. Her breath caught. She dropped low, crawling behind a thick hedge of pine. Another snap. Footsteps. Then a flashlight beam sweeping, slow, hunting. She held her breath, her hand pressed over her mouth. The light passed, paused, then moved on. She didn't move for a full 5 minutes. When the forest finally fell silent again, she got up slowly and ran once more, this time not just for herself, but for the life she carried. The next morning, exhausted and filthy, she stumbled into a roadside diner 10 miles away. Her dress was torn. Her face was smudged, but her eyes burned with survival. The waitress blinked at her in shock. "Miss, are you?" "I need a phone," Rosaline rasped, "and a safe place to sit. Please." Minutes later, she was in a back booth, dialing the only journalist she trusted, a woman who had once exposed a congressman's dark secrets with nothing but truth and grit. "This is Rosaline Cade," she said, voice cracking. "I have evidence. I have the real story, and I want the world to hear it." Silence on the other end. Then the voice, calm, certain. "Tell me everything." And she did. Every detail, every file, every photo, the false identity, the manipulation, the woman in the photos, the USB hidden in the vase, the nursery, the voices, the fire, the whispers in the dark. When she was done, the journalist simply said, "Where can I meet you?" Hours later, they met at a safe house 3 towns away, this time arranged by people the billionaire didn't own. Rosaline handed over the second USB. "He's still trying to reach me," she said. "Even now, if something happens to me, I need this to go public." The journalist nodded. "I promise you, the world will know." For the first time in days, Rosaline exhaled. Just a little. She wasn't free yet, but she was fighting back now, and she had a voice louder than his money. The truth. The story hit the news within 24 hours. Front pages, breaking headlines, viral clips on every social media platform. Exclusive. Wife of billionaire James Cade exposes chilling secrets behind empire. The footage aired unfiltered, the secret files, the money trails, the surveillance. The video of Rosaline, eyes bloodshot but voice unwavering, detailing everything. The bruised women, the shadow deals, the obsession that started before she even met him. The world erupted. His lawyers tried to control the damage, painting her as an unstable gold digger seeking revenge. But public sympathy was brutal, especially when her pregnancy was revealed. The media dubbed her the trapped bride. The internet exploded in her defense. And just like that, James Cade's fortress of silence cracked wide open. More women came forward. His former assistant, a maid, even a private security guard who had once seen something he was ordered to forget. Their stories all matched. Coercion, fear, obsession, disappearances. The FBI reopened every dormant investigation with his name in it. Bail was denied. His connections vanished. One by one, his allies distanced themselves, unwilling to sync with him. Rosaline stayed hidden, moving from place to place under protection. But her face was everywhere now. Every headline, every screen. She had exposed a monster, but monsters didn't vanish easily. Not men like him. Then came the letter. No return address. No fingerprints. Just delivered to the safe house door. Inside was a photo. A sonogram. Her sonogram. Scrawled beneath in red ink. "I never lose what's mine." She stared at it for hours. Not in fear, not this time, but with rage. He was still reaching. Even behind steel bars. still trying to make her run. But she wasn't running anymore. She turned to the journalist who had stayed by her side. "Get me a press conference." "You sure?" the journalist asked. "You've already made headlines." "I haven't finished the story," Rosalind said. "I want him to see me strong, standing, and unafraid. I want him to know that this child won't carry his name." The next morning she stood in front of a podium, the cameras flashing, the world watching. "I was never the victim you thought I'd be," she said clearly. "You chose me because I looked easy to control. But what you never understood was that I was always watching. And now the whole world is too." She stepped away from the podium as reporters screamed questions. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She had turned the hunter into the hunted. And now she was ready for the final blow. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the halls. Cameras flashed like lightning, and armed guards stood by every door. Inside, James Cade sat in his suit, no longer designer, now prison gray, his wrists bound in steel. He still held his posture like a king, but the throne beneath him had already turned to ash. Across the aisle sat Rosalind. No makeup, no jewelry, just strength carved into bone. Her stomach was round now, a silent, powerful declaration that life was growing, despite everything he tried to destroy. She hadn't looked at him until now, but when she did, their eyes locked. He smirked, that same cruel, confident smirk, as if none of it touched him, as if the walls of power would still protect him. But this time, Rosalind smiled back, and it wasn't fear, it was fire. The judge entered. The trial began. Witnesses were called: maids, employees, a former private investigator who had been paid to follow her. Every word peeled another layer of the polished image James had built. Piece by piece, his empire was torn down in public view. Then came her turn. The courtroom fell into a hush as Rosalind took the stand. She recounted it all, from the night they met to the cold silence in the jet, the locked nursery, the photos, the secret files, her escape through smoke and death. And then she paused. Her hand rested on her belly. "He thought I was weak," she said, voice steady. "He thought choosing me would be easy. But I wasn't his choice. I was his reckoning." The room erupted in silence so thick, it felt sacred. When she stepped down, she didn't look back. Not even when he finally spoke, trying to paint her as ungrateful, delusional, a manipulative woman twisting the story. But the jury didn't believe him. After weeks of testimony and evidence, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded, press scrambling, guards moving in. James lunged, just slightly, toward her and was met with the butt of a rifle to the back of his neck. She didn't flinch. Later that night, Rosalind sat alone on a park bench, staring at the skyline. Free, really. Finally free. The wind picked up, and she closed her eyes. "You'll never be yours," she whispered to the ghost of him. "Not me, not this child. Never again." Her phone buzzed. A text from the journalist. "They offered you a book deal. Want to tell it all?" Rosalind smiled. "Not yet. Let me live first." She leaned back, her hand over her belly. She had survived hell. Now it was time to build heaven. For her, and for the child who would never, ever grow up in a cage. She married a billionaire, but she didn't marry love. She married a lie, a trap, a man with power and poison in his veins. But she rose, not in fury, but in fire. She exposed him, outwitted him, survived him. And now, she walks not as someone who escaped, but as someone who conquered. Because in the end, she wasn't just a victim. She was the verdict. She married a billionaire, then discovered his darkest secret. Now the world knows, and the world won't forget. The truth always wins when someone is brave enough to speak it.